As you all know, we're 1 month after the devastating earthquakes that have hit Turkey and Syria last month on February 6th. It's been a very difficult month for people in the region. Millions of people have been affected by the two double earthquakes that hit that were 7.8 and 7.6 in magnitude, and having an epicenter in Marash near Gaziantep and affecting all of southern Turkey and northern Syria, and the quakes really reaching further regions to Lebanon and beyond. In that month also, there have been several like not even aftershocks, but really earthquakes that happened afterwards that were also very large in magnitude, between 5 to 6.4, as well as hundreds, and some people even have measured thousands of aftershocks. So the whole area has truly been unsettled, and it continues until now. Hopefully, we're hoping that this is the tail end of these kinds of quakes, and that people will begin to return to normalcy and begin the rebuilding process. But it has been very difficult for millions of people on the ground in southern Turkey and northern Syria. One of the greatest, a natural disaster is always a devastation wherever it occurs. Specifically, this earthquake has been an additional disaster, an additional emergency, and additional devastation, because you have an earthquake happening on a war-torn area and on a refugee population, on an area that has already been really struggling for the past 12 years because of the war and because of the mass displacement and the mass violence and destruction that has already happened in northern Syria, and southern Turkey being an area where millions of Syrian refugees have resettled. And so having an earthquake in this area, that whether it's in northern Syria, where the actual infrastructure and the buildings, and whether in wherever, which area you're talking about, has already been suffering so much from 12 years of extreme war and also internal displacement. And if you're talking about southern Turkey, where you've had millions of Syrian refugees resettle, and so these cities have expanded very quickly. Cities and towns have grown in size really quickly. So that means lots of new buildings, lots of new infrastructure, and a lot of buildings that have been built not to a standard of surviving earthquakes. All of this made this area specifically high level of devastation, high levels of death. Over 50,000 people have been killed. Many people were not recovered. Many people are missing. Many injuries, and to an area that has already been really burdened with its infrastructure, whether we're talking about water, electricity, health infrastructure, all around. And so this is kind of the situation on the ground, and it is also developing. And right now we're in the phase of, post the the first initial days of emergency and recovery, and now it's kind of in that in between of what are people going to do, how are they going to resettle, where are people living, and those are the things that we wanted to talk about today. I'm going to split this up into an update on Turkey and specifically Kerem's response. So for everybody here, I think would know that Kerem Foundation, most of our work is based in Turkey. We have 2 Kerem houses, which are innovation community centers, one in Reyhanli, which is on the southern border of Turkey with Syria. It's really a couple miles from the Syrian border. It's in the province of Hatay, one of the provinces that were hardest hit by the earthquakes. And we have a second center that is in Istanbul. So when we're talking about our work, we're talking primarily our work in Turkey. After, specifically for the team in Reyhanli, when the earthquakes hit on February 6th, our team felt it in a big manner. Of course, they were right there, almost near the epicenter, especially our team members who were in Antakya, which is a city it's an ancient city, and a big city that's about 45 minutes north of Reyhanli. It's also known as Antioch, also known as Hatay, and one of our team members, Asala, lives there. She's one of the people who lost her home completely, and she was thankfully able to to flee with her parents and her two daughters. They were actually homeless for a few days in Antakya, and she actually was able to have an interview on NPR in those very early days, giving a voice to the survivors of the earthquake, to the world, because what happened in those very early days is the narrative that was happening on the media that Gaziantep and that area was the hardest hit, and through the days after, there was a realization that Hatay and Antakya specifically, it was one of the hardest hit areas. And I witnessed Antakya when I visited there just a couple weeks ago. I mean, it's a city where the entire city core completely doesn't exist anymore. Whether you're talking about the old city, new high rises, really everything just crumbled to the ground. And so when the earthquakes happened at the beginning and Antakya got cut off by land from all of the roads were completely, and the highways were broken, and there was no communications with the city, it kind of became isolated very quickly, and the level of destruction was not discovered actually until a couple days later. And so our team on the ground in Reyhanli immediately took action. First of all, making sure that our team are all safe, and then the team that were actually all survivors of the earthquake and also who are Syrian refugees themselves began to take action to go out and start providing food and water and blankets to everybody that was outside of their homes, and also taking action to start evacuating people out of Antakya to safety. So those were what were happening in the first few days after the earthquake. There was nobody on the ground providing any kind of aid and support at that moment, and the response from the government was actually very, very slow in the province of Hatay. And I would say that even a month later, it's still slower than it is in other provinces, because there are 11 provinces in Turkey that have been affected by the earthquake. So there's a lot of areas to cover. So specifically, Hatay has not been receiving aid as quickly as other areas. On the communication side, so I'm sure that you all are very aware of, we were able to mobilize quickly. I would say that sadly, we haven't been in this emergency mode in a very long time, but we are used to being pulled away from our work. It's happened many times during the war, whether in the days of the bombing of Aleppo, whether in the days after chemical weapons attacks, whether the days after the sieges, and even during the pandemic. Our team basically had to shift gear completely on what we thought was going to be a very stable 2023 coming out of the pandemic, and we had a plan for a lot of things that we wanted to do, and we got pulled out completely of all of that into emergency mode and fundraising mode and communications mode. So a bunch of these people on the team who really worked 24 hours a day for the first couple of weeks, being on call to be able to provide on the spot communications with everybody, develop communications, and be available, as well as work on fundraising as quickly as possible. And many of you here contributed generously to the emergency fund, so I really thank you. And this is very important because we all know that emergencies stay in the news cycles for very short amounts of time, when the actual response takes many months and if not years, and we'll talk about that as well. So we knew we had to communicate and fundraise as quickly as possible, even as we were figuring out what to do on the ground. I'm very proud that this emergency fund, we were able to raise $1 million in the first 8 days. And also, I thank everybody here on the call. I know we have Richard from Jusur, they contributed very generously with $250,000 to this emergency fund. And then we were able now to pass $2 million for our emergency fund, which is a significant amount of funding that's going to help us help a lot of people in southern Turkey, in northern Syria, as well as in the longer term response that we're going to be working on this summer, in making sure that many children get access to education needs and a lot of things that we do at Kerem House, but being able to mobilize that for people that have been displaced by the earthquakes. So I wanted to, so 2 weeks after the earthquake, I decided to go to southern Turkey. Oh, before I talk about that, I'll talk just a tiny bit about Istanbul because that becomes a little bit forgotten in that Istanbul quickly, our center became a place of refuge for the kids that attend Karam House who also had family members in the region that was affected by the earthquakes. So while we had to shut down Karam House Reyhanli immediately, and it just reopened last week, we used Karam House Istanbul as a place for kids to come to gather. A lot of people are traumatized by the news of the earthquakes, and a lot of families were actually receiving relatives from the south who were starting to migrate towards Istanbul. In addition to that, our team that are Syrian refugees and Turkish people, basically everybody has been affected by the earthquakes in that they'd lost family members, they'd lost friends, they were evacuating family members. So it was not, even if you were outside of the earthquake region, you were still very much directly affected by the earthquakes. And so that the space became very important to the kids in those first couple of weeks, in that when the schools were closed, kids were coming and families were coming daily to do different kinds of activities. We still continue to run our innovation studios because we know that to combat trauma, it's very important to go right into normalcy as quickly as possible. So we were balancing shorter term activities that would provide mental health support for the kids and the families, as well as our normal studio programming to the kids, as well as providing emergency aid support for families in need of support that were arriving to Istanbul, which meant also food baskets and blankets and water and hygiene kits and all the kinds of things that you need, because vulnerable families were welcoming vulnerable families into their homes because so many people were left without a home. 2 weeks after the earthquake, I decided to go to Turkey to see the team, to be with the team and to assess the situation. And our board chair, Rasha Mansouri, traveled with me. She lives in London. We met together in Istanbul and traveled to Reyhanli. We got there exactly 2 weeks after that first earthquake of February 6th. And we had planned to spend the whole week in Reyhanli assessing the situation, meeting families, and starting to visit the informal camps that were going up everywhere across Reyhanli. So Reyhanli is a city, it used to be just a very tiny town on the border of southern Turkey. And when I went there the first time in 2012, Reyhanli was one street. It was a street you passed through leaving Syria, going to wherever else you're going. And since then, it used to have a population of around 90,000 people. Now it has a population of over 200,000 people, the majority of whom are Syrian refugees. And so this town has really expanded organically into many, many streets over the years, like growing much quicker than a normal town can. And miraculously, Reyhanli is one of a couple of towns in this region that actually was not destroyed by the earthquake. There was one building that was completely crushed. Some buildings had structural damage, but for the most part, it was not the devastation that we saw in Antakya and other, like Karakan, other villages even outside Reyhanli are completely flattened. And so what makes this unique is that many people are coming to Reyhanli to settle and find refuge because the town still had the infrastructure and buildings there. So when I arrived there with Rasha that Monday, we began to see some tents coming up. Like it was as fast as, we'd go into Karam House for an hour, come out, and where there would be 3 tents, an hour later there would be 10. Now there are thousands of tents across Reyhanli, across any kind of opening, any kind of park, across the whole town. So we checked into our hotel, and we went to dinner, and after dinner at around 7 or 8 o'clock at night, I felt, the ground roll under my feet. That's exactly what I felt. And there was nothing really else. There was no sound or anything that you think of when an earthquake happens. And I thought that it was an aftershock. And then immediately the electricity went out. So you could see just black all around you. And people started yelling earthquake, earthquake, and started running out of the restaurant. And we ran out out too. And even Rasha and Firas, who's our site manager, they didn't actually feel anything at all. So the expectation was that this was an aftershock. We only realized later when everybody there have the apps open, and immediate access to all of the information of what earthquakes happened, where they are, things that I've never really seen before. And so immediately they found out that this was actually a 6.2 level earthquake. I was getting messages from friends in Lebanon asking where I was because they felt it. And Firas actually started getting calls from his friends in Cairo who'd felt the same earthquake. So it actually was a significant one. Again, nothing happened in Reyhanli of significance, but it really shook the people. We stayed without electricity for the entire night. It was very hectic for the first couple of hours, where we were hearing a lot of ambulances all around, and we didn't understand why, because we couldn't see anything destroyed. And it was only until afterwards we realized that the actual hospital of Hatay, of Reyhanli, had really been damaged structurally, and without electricity, they evacuated their ICU patients into their ambulances to continue supporting the ICU patients, and that's why we heard so many ambulances. The reason why I'm saying all of this is that experiencing this, it just, we lived only 2 days of the actual terror that people are living through really until now, which is, it's not that the earthquake itself, that moment, is not the scary part. The scary part is all of the moments after, because everybody's waiting for a second one to come. Everybody's waiting about what if their building isn't able to withstand if another one comes. And so that was really something that affected me, is I witnessed so many people from our team and families and just people on the street actually putting tents up in front of their buildings to sleep in because they're afraid of their homes. And that's a really hard concept that I'd never, we saw so much during this war, so many ways of people having to be displaced. But this idea of that your building is standing and you're sleeping in a tent because you're scared of home, I felt it was just like a whole other level of trauma, a whole other level of, it's very hard to wrap your head around. And especially for people who themselves have lost their homes multiple times, to see that was very, very hard. And I lived it. I mean, we had to, we went into, they really didn't let us back into the hotel to sleep. They said that and I wouldn't have trusted that building anyways. And so they let us in really for a couple of minutes to run upstairs and take our stuff out. And I think, like, even in those moments, I didn't feel safe. And I was only in there for maybe 5 minutes max. And we went to Karam House, which we knew was safer. And it was a 2-story building. And we slept on the couches in the reception. At the beginning, we were thinking of sleeping in the car. It was getting cold really fast. And so this is, we had these choices, and it's a very big privilege to even have a choice. Many people don't have choices. And I saw many people just having chairs outside, sitting outside and not sleeping. Rasha and I stayed there for 2 nights and cut our trip short, having to go back to Istanbul because there was no place for us to stay, and we were actually becoming more of a burden on people than a help because everybody was so worried about us. In that one day that we did stay extra, we did go to Antakya and we visited the city and saw the devastation and saw the amount of destruction. We saw a lot of the mass graves. We also saw a lot of the tents coming up. And then in Reyhanli, we visited 2 camps, which we are starting to support now. One camp has about 1,000 people in it already, and another camp was being established and also now has around 1,000 people. That's right in Reyhanli. We're starting to provide these 2 camps with meals, and we'll continue to provide them with meals during Ramadan, as well as starting to put together activities that we can deliver to the kids in these camps with our team. We have assessed our buildings since then, and a lot of what the government is doing is assessing buildings so that people can feel safe to go back into their buildings. So we're starting to see this now. People are, coming, and there have been a couple of earthquakes since then, but not as big as the one that was a couple weeks ago. And people are starting to return to their homes slowly. In terms of what we've done in the past month, we've evacuated almost 500 people from Antakya. We've delivered food baskets, hundreds of food baskets, thermal blankets, diapers, wipes, bread bags, thousands of bottles of water, mattresses in Hatay, cash assistance for 42 families in Antakya. We're continuing to create lists of cash assistance to families that have been displaced from their homes and found new homes to live. We also are starting to provide mental health support to our team members first, as well as a program that'll start next week, which is to provide mental health support to our team members who run programs at Karam House, and also to provide them with training to provide mental health support to the people that they support. So the first level was really the team, their families, our families in our community, as well as other families that have been affected by the earthquake. So we're trying to think of the work happening in circles. In Syria, we actually we're really happy to be able to work inside Aleppo. So that is inside the city. There is a lot of Aleppo lost many buildings in the earthquake, and so we were able to begin to help people by providing food baskets and blankets at the beginning, just as we did in Reyhanli, and also distribute 6 months of rent for families and getting them into homes. And we're able to now start repairs with the buildings inside Aleppo for people to be able to stay in their homes. And we are also working on now Ramadan plans for people inside Aleppo and also in camps that have been created because of the displacement from the earthquake. So before I wanted to open up to Q&A, which I'm very excited to talk to you all about. Just so that everybody, I love giving a list of action items. You've all been great supporters of Karam, and so this is just kind of and we can follow up with this in an email, but it's really, really important to continue sharing news of the earthquake and what the work is, because it is a long-term process. This emergency is a long-term one, and so please try to stay informed, try to continue following us on social media, following other organizations on social media to keep informed, because I know this has completely gone away from the news and media outlets. And please continue to help us fundraising, share the fund with your friends and family. If people can become monthly donors, that's hugely supportive to us. If there's a specific part of the work that you'd like to help us support, that's also really important. And please communicate with your friends and families about Karam's work and other reputable aid organizations' work that in northern Syria and in southern Turkey, because we need a lot of support across, because millions of people have been affected by this natural disaster. And right before I open it up for Q&A, I just wanted to give a very short briefing on what we're doing next. I'm very excited that we're looking into, first of all, Karam House Reyhanli opened on Saturday, which we're so happy about. First, for the team, we had 2 structural engineers check the building for safety, and this Saturday, the students will return to Karam House and Reyhanli to continue their studios. Our Spring 2 studios are starting in both locations, and we will be able to have kids back in the building. We're also working on Ramadan plans in Istanbul, in Reyhanli, and also inside Syria that we will be updating you all on. And we are working on how to provide activities for kids in the camps. So our idea is how do we actually take this life-affirming work that we have done for years now at Karam Houses, which is really nurturing kids with creativity and innovation. We know that this is what kids need, especially in these traumatic times. So we're looking on how to adapt Karam House's model into some kind of mobile model that can reach camps, to reach people and mobilize and be able to do very quickly with our team on the ground. And this is something we're going to start testing, and hopefully we want to build this into a really robust program that we can actually deliver to lots of kids this summer, because we know people will still be displaced in camps and containers, in tents, as they're waiting for the rebuilding process. And we want to make sure that we can continue the continuity of their education. And we're also looking into how to support support our scholars in a very deep way, because a lot of our scholars have been affected. The kids in university have been affected by either their universities closing, going online, university students who've lost family in the earthquake. And so how do we provide these students with more support, which we're starting to do now, and continuing to look into ways to support the scholars, not just the Karam scholars, but new scholars as well. These are the kinds of things that we're working on, and of course we'll keep you updated.